Equinox came out in 2015, prior to the release of the Natar quest and sorties. Since then, she has seen basically no real changes. She's gained augments in 2016 and 2018, had some minor stat changes as part of global updates, but nothing specifically for her in years. However, new mods, arcanes, and metas have changed the way she can be played by a lot. I'll show you the power that's gone untouched all this time, and how to maximize it until she's changed. I'm TheKengineer, let's solve the practical problem. Equinox is a blend of night and day, two forms in one frame, giving you two different styles of content. You can also get two more styles of content from me with Twitch and Patreon for live streams and behind the scenes. The links for these are down below, but to give you a taste as to how testing Equinox went...
What are you doing? Aim and fire. Oh no.
Suffice to say, the Duality augment is bad, with almost every weapon I handed the clone. Some will argue that it has some uses with some weapons occasionally, but it's overall an unreliable, short duration option that forces you to form switch just to use it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. From the top then. Equinox's passive is a joke. On picking up a health orb, you also gain 10% of its value as energy. On picking up an energy orb, you gain 10% of its value as health. This is the exact effect you get from an unranked equilibrium mod. No one uses an unranked equilibrium mod. Even with the somewhat modern change to health orbs to make them 50 health by default, that's still only 5 energy. So functionally, Equinox does not have a passive. Equinox will start a mission in day or night form depending on her emissive colour channel. Colder, darker colours are for night, warm and bright for day, with an icon next to it indicating as much. Any frame with subsumed rest and rage from Equinox can use this same channel to determine which form of it they use. Equinox herself can switch between forms with her first ability, Metamorphosis, granting buffs and changing how her other 3 abilities behave. To sum up those 2 forms then, switching to night form grants a small amount of shields and a small amount of armour. The tank difference is basically unnoticeable and decays over time, dissipating down to nothing. You gain access to Rest, to put small clusters of enemies instantly to sleep at long range, Pacify, to reduce the damage dealt by enemies within an aura at the cost of energy over time per enemy, and Mend, to grant shields to you and any ally who gets a kill or assist within range. Mend will also charge up base enemies that die within range. When you turn off Mend, it will heal you and your team for 75% of all health and shields lost by enemies within the aura. Unless you're in a really low level mission, this is basically a full team heal after 1 or 2 kills. Switching to day form grants a small damage buff and speed enhancement, which again dissipates over time down to nothing. You gain access to Rage, to make small clusters of enemies at range move and act faster, but also take more damage. Provoke, to provide a strength buff to you and allies in the aura at the cost of energy with each buffed cast. And Maim, to deal a tiny amount of slash damage with slash proc to enemies in range, while again building up charge from enemies dying in the aura. Disable Maim to turn the stored charge into a nuke with no line of sight limitation. The reason I'm calling out these sets of features so broadly up front is that you almost cannot cross them over between forms. While in night form, you cannot gain the strength buff of Provoke, no matter how useful it'll be to Pacify or to Mend. Any previously raged enemies will remain raged, and you can equip an augment to keep the charge from Maim when you switch to night form and Mend. If Provoke was active on switching, it'll apply the strength bonus to Metamorphosis, granting you at most an extra 200 armor and 120 shields, but Provoke will turn off as you switch. While in day form, you cannot gain the defensive benefits of Pacify, and in fact have no innate defensive option at all. Any previously stepped enemies will remain unconscious, and the same energy transfer augment from night form can still maintain your charge on your 4th in day form. As there's no way to keep Pacify and Provoke up when switching forms, the augment Peaceful Provocation will lose all built-up charge each time you switch. All the extra strength or all the slowing effect will be lost. So really then, it's best to see what Equinox can do in each of her separate forms. In night form, Rest is an incredibly great ability. She can spam cast it to put clusters of both enemies and beasts to sleep, well suited for stealth takedowns and perfect animal captures. The ability will prevent you casting it unless it would actually affect an enemy, meaning you can't waste the energy. The very long cast distance, speedy cast time, and small but serviceable AoE going through walls and terrain makes for a reliable sleep tool. Its biggest downsides are its base AoE and its wake up threshold. The AoE is only 5 meters, meaning you will want to stack a bunch of range to cover more than tiny groups at a time. This tiny radius is also shared by its augment, Calm and Frenzy, which would spread the effect to enemies within that radius on killing an affected foe. Here's the problem: if you put a cluster of enemies to sleep, they stop moving. The likelihood of many enemies then wandering into that same space is very low in missions with wide angles of approach, so you'd be unlikely to catch many enemies that weren't already in the initial cast. On the other hand, casting it at choke points will likely extend the effect, but it'll extend to enemies far enough out of both line of sight and your kill box to only slow down their approach to you. Missions where you'd want repeatedly stepped enemies with no concern for kill boxes are the same missions where enemies are largely too static and spread out for this to be valuable. As for the wake up threshold, it just means that enemies will wake up from rest if reduced below 50% of their hit points on sleeping. They'll need to get up from the floor, and that takes long enough to prevent them counting as having woken up if you're quick at killing them. But should you accidentally damage some enemies enough without killing them, you'll end the effect early and can be surprised by an attack from an enemy you thought was incapacitated. It's not a big deal, so again, rest is a pretty good ability. Naturally, as rest is a crowd control ability, it has no effect on overguarded enemies, no effect on bosses, and can be resisted by some other higher threat enemies like acolytes. Pacify is another useful defensive tool. It creates a damage softening aura around Equinox. With base or higher strength, it'll reduce the damage enemies are dealing, first by halving their damage, and then dividing their damage by your strength. The unique nature of reducing enemy damage, rather than resisting it, means this protects hit point pools you normally couldn't. Whether for overguard or some objectives like in mirror defense, you effectively apply a multiplier to those hit points. Pacify does come with few serious downsides, however. First is that it costs energy over time for each enemy in the aura. This cost is limitless, scaling up for each additional enemy affected. Despite the ability card suggesting it's a one-off cost, you will be continuously drained. Unaffected enemies like those of Overguard will not cause this cost, however. Second is that the damage reduction falls off over distance. Close enemies receive the full effect, but it steps down at greater distances to a minimum of 50% effective. Thirdly, it has no effect on overguarded enemies. Despite the base ability having no crowd control, that special layer will prevent your protection from applying. Pacify's augment will apply a secondary effect to the ability to slow enemies in the aura, though it only works after charging up by having you or allies take damage inside the aura. With 200% strength, this hits maximum slow of 80% when fully charged up by receiving plenty damage. This does not charge quickly, especially as you're trying to avoid taking damage by using the ability in the first place. Lastly is Mend, applying a shield restoration aura on killing or assisting on killing enemies in the aura. All allies can benefit from this. Each kill will restore only a small amount of shields, but it will extend into over shields too. This ability has a fixed energy drain based on your casting stats. Enemies killed in this aura confer 75% of the shields and health lost in the aura to Mend's charge. When you uncast it, every ally within range will receive shields and health as needed up to max, shared from the pool of hit points stored. Warframes, companions, spectres, anything on your side that could be healed is healed. Normal defense objectives will only receive a small amount of healing over time, and mirror defense objectives get nothing at all. Once again, there are downsides. There's no refund on excess charge on uncasting. Saving of 1 million healing will still only bring you to full health and shields, not more, with the rest just lost. The ability being a channel will disable energy over time restoration, like Energy Nexus and Xeneric Wellspring. Switching form without the energy transfer augment will lose all stored charge for nothing. So overall in Night form you have a hard control ability with optional short range spreading, a damage mitigation ability with optional slowing, and a double stacked healing ability. For Day form, Rage is all about ramping up the lethality of the mission. Enemies afflicted with Rage move faster, act and shoot faster, but also die faster from the damage vulnerability. This has no strength cap on it, so you can make enemies as fast and vulnerable as you can manage. Unlike Nova's ability to speed up an entire room, though with a flat 100% damage vulnerability, Rage is targeted on a tight cluster of enemies, just like with Rest. Once again, the augment is hamstrung by how the ability works. If the enemies are moving faster, they'll move away from slower, unaffected enemies and make it harder for the very small radius of frenzy to spread. Once again, Overguard blocks the effects. You cannot make overguarded or other immune enemies take more damage this way, but also cannot make them faster. With Provoke, it's entirely a strength buff. For yourself, this is just bad. The strength is capped at 50% at base, or 80% with the Peaceful Provocation augment fully charged. That's 25 to 40% more damage vulnerability, and 10 to 16% more speed buff to raged enemies. On Maim, it's even less effective, as the strength only modifies the base damage of the ability, a paltry 75 to 120 extra damage. While the strength buff doesn't fall off with range like Pacify's damage reduction does, it'll still cost at base 3 additional energy for each ability you or your allies cast with the buff, and it is largely providing you with very little for the cost. Outside of choice subsumes, Dayform has very little reason to be using this kind of a strength buff. But then, after a restricted damage vulnerability effect and a largely unhelpful strength boost, we have the core feature of Dayform, Maim itself. All the health and shield hit points lost by enemies while in the aura are tracked, and when the enemy dies anywhere by any means, 75% of those hit points are added to the main pool. Overguard hit points do not count. On dispelling Maim, the stored damage is released as pure slash to every target within the aura. The damage isn't split between them, but it does respect armor and faction modifiers like to infest it, and it falls off over the ability range down to 0 damage at the edge. As 75% of an enemy's hit points are stored, killing one enemy will usually not grant enough charge to kill other matching enemies with the nuke. A weakness to slash, applied viral procs, or a damage vulnerability effect can change that, but usually only on a target by target basis. Combined with the fall off, you usually require a few kills at the same level of hit points to take down matching targets within most of your aura. Many factions have devastating resistances to this. Ancient Disruptors will resist most of the damage due to it being ability damage. Grineer and Skuldra, with their very high armor values, will block up to 90% of the damage dealt. That means to kill a Grineer unit at 50% of your ability range and full armor, you need to have charged up on 27 kills of a matching unit for it to be lethal. You can mitigate this with armor removal options. The easiest of all of them is Corrosive Projection. This aura will reduce enemy armor by 18% per player who has one equipped, additive with other non-proc armor reductions. Alone, that reduces the matching kills to lethal at 50% range from 27 to 15. With more players in the aura, it goes down to 10, then 7, then 6, where no armor at all would need just 3 matching enemies killed. A full squad of Corrosive Projection then is very good news for Equinox, making Maim lethal over longer distances far more quickly. As Xmas units come with a huge hit point pool compared to normal enemies, killing them in the aura is also a very fast way of charging up an effective nuke. The Augment Energy Transfer can be very helpful for Maim nukes by allowing you to sit in night form most of the time. You build up the charge while using defensive abilities, then swap, nuke, swap when the time is right. It's a little clunky and incompatible with Peaceful Provocation, but it's the only way to make offensive use of Nightform's generated charge. So overall with Dayform, you have a semi-targeted enemy speed and vulnerability effect, a largely selfless strength buff because you can hardly use it, and a charging no line of sight nuke that requires kills to get kills. To put it very simply, Equinox is a bit of a mishmash of some individually helpful abilities that often cannot or will not work together. Now, I could call for any one of an infinite number of changes, but that's not going to help you use Equinox today. Instead, let's look at 6 ways of setting up your Equinox to work as she exists now. All of these setups work as modded, but I utilise a few Archon shards to make them flow better. Those are 1 shard for energy max, 1 shard for starting energy, and 1 or 2 shards for casting speed. The cast speed doesn't help the 1, but recasting a 4 and spam casting a 2 still benefit nicely from it. The first build, Gated Transfer, is a max range Maim nuke, relying on both rest and mend to survive until charged. While the strength is low, gaining any amount of shields will still restore your shield gate. All the while, you've got maximum radius sleep zones to put threatening groups on hold, with Arcane Concentration helping to make that last as long as possible. You can swap Concentration for a utility or simple damage buffy Arcane like Consequence or Rage without issue. Build your charge, swap today, nuke the room, then swap back and reset. The downright fleeting expertise is intentional to get just a little more duration on the sleeping enemies at no cost to your actual efficiency. If you only have a max rank 1 though, the build still works. The reason I'm going all in on efficiency is that Equinox is barred from energy over time effects like Energy Nexus and has no orb or energy generation innately. As she is frequently killing enemies with Maim, far beyond the reach of companions, Synth Deconstruct will not trigger often enough for Equilibrium. With so little energy income, efficiency pushes every last drop to last as long as possible. Naturally, Arcane Energize is huge for that, with each proc granting almost 3 minutes of Maim energy drain. As this is a low strength build, the third ability is completely useless and is free for subsuming. You already have crowd control and healing built in, so consider a utility feature like Silence or Vial Rush to benefit from the maximum range stat. Now if you find the form switching to nuke undesirable, or the shield regeneration simply not effective enough, we can modify the build to accommodate Evade in this Shadow Maim setup. With a switch to extremely high duration instead of range, we can also lower our efficiency to keep energy transfer still. I'm including energy transfer to retain the option of switching to using rest for a full stealth approach, and popping back into a Maim nuke whenever it's time to sneeze like an overdramatic dad. By triggering Arcane Concentration first, Evade will have a base 34.2 second duration and gain 6.8 seconds with every headshot kill, making it very easy to maintain. Just 4 headshot kills will allow it to last until the cooldown would expire for safe recasting if the duration runs out. But sometimes you don't need to nuke. Sometimes it's just about putting everything to sleep. For that, maximized range once again, this time with a backup rolling guard in case of emergencies, plus the Calm and Frenzy augment to spread the rest effect just on the off chance someone got overlooked. As this is ideal for a Somnicidal playthrough, I've included Arcane Trickery. While a low chance to trigger at 15%, it can grant you the invisibility needed to ensure even the overguarded or overcautious enemy never sees you until it's too late. This is also the only build to recommend enemy radar over corrosive projection, as armor is entirely unimportant to finishers. Spam rest, then stab with your best. For more powerful finishers, consider subsuming in Silence with its augment instead of Calm and Frenzy. This will be a moderate increase with the given low strength, or you can trade range mods like Augur Reach or Overextended for strength, swapping wide arrest AoEs for heavier finishing blows. How far you take that trade is entirely personal preference. If you'd rather a more flashy caster play, we have the Nuclear Paladin. Hide under the shadow of stealth with Shade or Cuirass, and never attack with your weapons to maintain invisibility while near enemies. Activate Provoke to increase your strength to at least 200%, or have enough Archon shards to do that for you, to make your rage ability set up enemies to take at least double damage. Subsume Smite is capped at dealing about 50% of enemy hit points as damage, while also removing Overguard and armor. 50%, doubled by Rage, is a one-shot kill. Have your Maim active to soak up the charge from enemy after enemy being snapped out of existence, and detonate the nuke on demand. As Overguard blocks Rage, you will need to smite them first to remove it, quickly rage them, and then smite them again to kill. Do this quickly because non-lethal smites leave enemies irradiated and hostile to everyone. Those stray shots can be deadly to Invisible Paper Tank. Now sadly, this build is not as strong as it could be. Against a Corpus, it's amazing, right up until you run into nullifiers. Switch to Operator and use your amp to destroy nullifier bubbles, retaining the invisibility on your frame. For Grineer, their armor means you need a lot more kills to charge up a Maim nuke. Alternatively, a Nairu Operator can remove their armor, or a full squad of corrosive projection can make armor mostly unimportant. This also affects Skuldra in basically the same way. For Infested, Ancient Disruptors will block most of the ability damage outright. Further still, Smite will target all Ancients on their backs, which happens to be their strong spot, halving your damage. That means no one-shot. I've reported this as a bug, as there's no sense in abilities actively hitting the least damaging spot on a unit. For the Corrupted, their resistance to radiation damage also means Smite cannot one-shot with this build. This affects both the Void and Relic Fishers. The only solution to these and Ancients is to find a way to apply yet more damage and vulnerability, like with Viral Procs from a Duplex Bond Companion. Otherwise, this build just does not work there. Then, for the Tech Rot. They don't have Ancients in the same way, but they do have the Tech Rot Scuzzy. These also will be targeted by Smite on their strong spot, halving damage. You can still one-shot other nearby enemies and use Maim to kill the Scuzzies, but it's far from convenient. So the Nuclear Paladin works, mostly if you're fighting Corpus without nullifiers, or Grineer without armor. Did you ever wish Warframe was a slower pace these days? Then let's enable Bullet Time. This build again uses Provoke to give enough strength to step over a strength breakpoint, but this time to achieve an immediate 95% slow on Gloom. Gloom is just superior to Pacify, not least of which for it working in both day and night forms. By casting Provoke before Gloom, the strength is snapshot, so that also carries over into night form, even though Provoke itself turns off. So now, every nearby enemy is slowed to 5% of their normal speed, unless they have some crowd control immunity like with Xmas. You can still use Maim out to 26 meters, or Mend if things are still dangerous. Then, to top it off, we can connect Gloom's Lifesteal, with Equinox now channeling 3 abilities at once. The incredibly niche Arcane Intention triggers on Gloom, Provoke and Maim, granting 750 extra max health to Equinox, which we can refill with the attacks through Gloom. This is a thoroughly optional arcane for sure, but how often are you channeling 3 simultaneous abilities for the whole mission? This might be the only time you use it. If you choose to skip Intention, also swap out Adaptation for Rolling Guard for brief immunity instead. Either way, you power up and power on Gloom, then laugh as every enemy vulnerable to crowd control, including Acolytes, all move in super slow motion. Freshly spawned Xmas will still be a priority, mind you. And then finally, if we're ready to do away with the day form entirely, we can go all in on tank for Equinox and the team. 170% strength, supported by Mold Vigor, crosses the 200% breakpoint on Peaceful Provocation. This means we can apply up to 80% slowing to nearby enemies, atop the 76% damage reduction aura it generates. Stacked up with Prime Redirection and Adaptation, we hit a peak of 89,000 effective shield hit points, plus the means to restore them both on kills and on disabling Mend. Aside from choosing when to uncast Mend, or throwing out some power naps, there's very little thought that goes into playing this kind of tank Equinox. Stay near your team and be their shield. Be warned though, the damage reduction still has that diminishing value over distance. The slowing effect needs to charge up, and Adaptation is rarely fully protective. All combined, it means you don't usually have tens of thousands of effective hit points. I call this setup GigaTank for the focus put into tanking, not necessarily the results of it. As there's basically no reason to form switch, you can set your emissive to night, and then subsume off Metamorphosis here for any of your preferred team support abilities to fully fit your role. Eclipse, Nourish, Bright Bonnet, Roar and Silence can all fill this slot for their different features. Throughout these 6 approaches, each only uses a couple pieces of Equinox's kit at any one time. She's got an array of powers to offer, ranging from the devastating to the downright disappointing. She just doesn't really try to bring it all together. I hope somewhere in there is a build to make your day, or night, whatever time it is where you are. As ever, much of the testing for Equinox happened live on stream, so do check those out and see if you can snag yourself a giveaway in the process. A big thank you to all channel supporters, and as always, mend friends, maim foes, and fight well, Tenno.